So today we're going to do a video talking about all the teams that is currently below the red line and looking at these teams to see which one are the most likeliest to make it to the playoffs at the end of the season, because we are now in the two-third mark of the season and we're getting pretty close in terms of the home stretch, where for some of these teams it is pretty much now or never to make the playoffs, or for some of these teams that maybe are right around the range of potentially going above the red line, they have a big opportunity to do so in these upcoming weeks. Or if you're a team that is kind of like in the middle of being near the bottom of the Western or Eastern Conference, you want to make sure you want to make a push so you can maybe get yourself a chance to finish above the red line before the end of the season. But that also being said, there are some teams that, since we are now this deep into the season, there's going to be some teams that are pretty much done and they are already in see you next season mode. In fact, most likely the teams on the right are kind of in that mode, especially the bottom three, where I'm going to put at are teams that are kind of in see you next season mode. Which, speaking of which, the first team I'm going to put, and the team that is the least likeliest to finish above the red line, despite the fact that they're below the red line right now, is the Houston Dynamo, who of course have the longest winless run in MLS at 16 games. And I did do some little research before this video to look at what is actually the longest winless run in MLS. The longest winless run in MLS is 20 games that the 1999 New Jersey Metro Star, or the New York, New Jersey Metro Star, of course, had. And we definitely don't want to remember what happened in that season, where they were considered one of the worst teams in MLS history. And the Dynamo, they have kind of 4 games to try to avoid reaching that mark. And when you look at ahead of their schedule, I mean, yeah, it's not going to be easy. I mean, I guess, for the Dynamo, I always said that, I don't think that this is a team that is going to go winless until the end of the season. I think eventually they're going to win at least 1 or 2 games. And I think the next game is probably the best chance, because they are playing against Austin FC in the Copa Tejas. And I know they did lose the first Copa Tejas against Austin FC, but that game is of course at home, and they're playing against an Austin team that has been kind of inconsistent in these last couple of games. And really, that is probably maybe the closest opponents that I think they have a big shot in terms of getting a W. But that's really kind of what they're chasing right now, and finally getting a win instead of actually making the playoffs, because again, this team has they're already kind of in that see you next season mode, and almost kind of like in that off season mode already, where they already started to make some changes in personnel. They recently just fired Matt Jordan, their GM, and now are looking to get a new GM to come into the team and maybe start this rebuilding process. But yeah, again, the Houston Dynamo, they pretty much have no shot in terms of making the playoffs, especially with how this winless run has continued. Speaking of long winless run, so another team that is least likely that is going to climb out of being below the red line and climb above the red line is none other than FC Cincinnati, who I think all the way back in May, you probably would say that they were already in see you next season mode with the way how bad things have gone. But there was definitely some glimmer of hope back in June that this team maybe could be a contender, and how that hope turns out to be a complete mirage. And now this team is embarking on one of the longest winless active run in MLS. In fact, I think this is the second longest active winless run right now in MLS, because I think FC Cincinnati has now gone 12 games without a win. And when you look at some of these games during their winless run, my oh my, some of these games are just brutal losses that FC Cincinnati has suffered. And this is why I even said back in the review last time, I mean, I'm kind of beyond saying I feel sorry for them, but it almost pains me to see them kind of suffer every single time. And like the Dynamo, I think they are in that mode where they're probably going to have to blow it up again. And especially the fact that they also have recently fired their GM. They're looking to try to search a new GM, where they're going to go through a rebuilding process and hope that the 4th time is finally the charm, where they can actually maybe not become the laughing stock of MLS. I mean, hey, at least the good thing that FC Cincinnati might do this season is that they might not win the wooden spoon. I mean, as much as I know Cincinnati fans have been sarcastically said they want to win the wooden spoon for the third year in a row to complete the dynasty of suckage. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they don't want to do so, and that, avoid winning the wooden spoon for the third year in a row. I guess that's progress compared to the first 2 seasons of them coming into the league. But now moving on to number 11, and that of course is Toronto FC. Now, I've said before with TFC, I know I said before I still believe that this team can make a late second half resurgence to get themselves above the red line, but that is before when I realized that they were actually 15 points behind the red line. And when you're this deep into the season, with 11 games left, and well, actually not 11 games, 12 games left, because Toronto of course have played 22 games so far this season, but with 12 games left and you have a 15-point gap to make up between the team that is of course above the red line right now, yeah, that is just way too late in terms of trying to make a second half resurgence. Like, that would be one of the best resurgence I've ever seen, and TFC might have to rely on a bit of a miracle to do so. But I think right now, if you're a TFC fan, you're probably just kind of avoid winning the wooden spoon, because if there is a team right now that currently owns the spot in terms of winning the wooden spoon, it's Toronto FC, and I don't think anybody would have thought that this team, I thought that this team, I know that they've been dealing with a lot of injury, and it was pretty clear that, with so many guys been injured on this team, they just, and since this team doesn't really have a lot of good backup option, you knew that this team was going to be in trouble. I did not think they would be this deep in trouble with the way that they're now leading the wooden spoon race. And again, right now, they just need to hope to try to get themselves out of that spot, because this would be one of the biggest failure and one of the biggest achievement that TFC have made this season for a team that are supposed to maybe think about playoff aspiration, or maybe even MLS Cup aspiration, and how they have just completely fallen off the map. And not to mention the fact that this is probably one of the biggest fall off we have ever seen an MLS team be. I mean, remember, this team was just a couple of points away from winning the Supporters' Shield away from the Philadelphia Union last year. How much have this team have completely fell off a cliff in the very next year? And this is probably even worse than what we saw, I think, when they won MLS Cup back in 2017, where, in 2018 they definitely fall off the map a little bit, but at least they finished 9th place and not as bad as they are right now. That is dead last in the Eastern Conference. But now moving on to number 10, and that of course is Austin FC. So for Austin, again, they're another team that is kind of in that mode where they're probably done in terms of their any chances of making the playoffs. I mean, I think their chances kind of just completely evaporated once they lost that game against FC Dallas, because that game was just so important for them to get all 3 points and maybe get themselves back into the playoff conversation. But now that they lost it to Dallas in that game, and also losing to Vancouver, and once again become a team that just are kind of near the bottom of the Western Conference with not a lot of hope to potentially make some ground. I think this is another team that is kind of like in we're pretty much done mode. But all I will say about Austin this season is that, as much as I know they didn't make it to the playoffs in their expansion season, which, there's no shame in terms of that, because, expansion team, as I said before, they usually don't make the playoffs in the first year. And I would also say that this Austin team, if you want me to compare this team to the FC Cincinnati team and which team is considered worse, I would say it still has to be FC Cincinnati, because at least with this Austin team, I've seen them playing very good soccer at time, and at least they could compete. But the only issue with this team is that they just cannot put the ball into the back of the net, and I'm pretty sure that is going to be something that they, of course, are going to try to solve. I mean, they kind of temporarily solved that with bringing Sebastian Driussi, and I think he has really made a big impact in terms of this attack. But I feel like they still need more pieces going on the attack, because again, this team right now, the main issue of why this team is in the spot that they are is that they just cannot score enough goals to, of course, win games. But now moving on to number 9, and that, of course, is the Chicago Fire. So, despite the fact that the Fire did get a much-needed 2-1 win, or actually, it wasn't a 2-1 win, it was a 1-0 win against the Red Bulls, and finally got a win out of their 5-game road trip that they have. I still don't really give the Fire a lot of hope, knowing the fact that, we'll see how their next 2 road game is, and if that is actually the only win that the Fire is going to get in this 5-game road trip, and they lose like the rest of the games during this 5-game road trip, I think they're all pretty much in done mode, because coming into this 5-game road trip, I knew it was always going to be tough for this team to go through this period and come out at least be in a spot to compete for the playoffs. But if they are not going to do so, then they definitely does face a bit of a mountain to climb. And not to also mention the fact that with this team at times being very inconsistent, yeah, do you trust the fact that the Fire can actually maybe make a late second half resurgence and go through a long period of an unbeaten streak and somehow find their way back in the conversation of the Eastern Conference? Yeah, I don't think it is. But at least, the reason why I do give them a little bit more hope compared to the team that is below them is that at least they're not at the bottom of the Eastern Conference, and at least they do still have kind of that gap where, it's pretty close to being a gap where it might be too far to potentially make a playoff push. But if this Fire team does start to get a couple of wins in a row, or maybe win at least one more game doing this 5-game road trip, then maybe, just maybe, they can have an outside shot of potentially getting back into the conversation of the Eastern Conference playoff race. But now moving on to number 8, and that of course is the New York Red Bulls. And technically, I would actually probably put the Red Bulls a little bit lower, because this team, even though they are also kind of in almost that same spot as the Fire, where they're at a point where they still do kind of have enough time where they can get things going. They can of course make a push in terms of making the playoffs in the East. Time is definitely running out, and the issue with this Red Bulls team, at least recently, is they're dropping way too many points at home. In fact, they have actually lost some games at home, which that was kind of the recipe for the Red Bulls of why they've been able to stay afloat above the red line for a long time in the beginning of the season, where they take the classic kind of ways where you win your home games and you are able to get draws, or maybe occasionally you do lose some games, but at least you get some points on the road and you can find yourself above the red line. And right now, it just doesn't seem like that's what the Red Bulls are doing right now, and especially with that loss against the Chicago Fire. Boy, that loss really hurts them, and especially not just hurt their playoff chances, but to play against a team that you might have the best opportunity to get a win at home and trying to get yourself back into the playoff race, and you lose 1-0 to them. Yeah, that's going to really sting their chances in terms of making the playoffs, and they're also getting to a point where it is getting close, where they don't turn things around. This team could also be in done mode. But now moving to the left side of the board, which this side, as I said in the beginning of the video, is more of a side where these teams does still have much more chances compared to the right side of the board, where maybe these teams don't really have a shot in terms of sort of getting themselves out of this hole and climb above the red line before the end of the season. And we'll start off with FC Dallas. And technically, if you are one of those teams in the Western Conference that is between 6 through 11th place, technically you definitely have a big shot in terms of making the playoffs, because there's only a 5-point gap between all 5 of these teams. And as the season continues, if that log jam is going to continue into the last couple of weeks, it's going to be very interesting to see. Those spots could be potentially changing every single week depending on how the resort does. Now, obviously, FC Dallas is that last team that is kind of in that log jam right now, that 6-team race where there's like 6 teams that is vying for two spot right now, and as I said, they're the last team that is there. And I will say that even though Dallas still has a chance to make the playoffs, I really think their playoff hope is relying on one player and one player only, and that player is Ricardo Pepi. And you can clearly see that with Dallas, when they did not have Ricardo Pepi in that game against RSL, they just did not look as dynamic as they were when they were able to to have him. And you can also say that Ricardo Pepi is kind of the reason why this Dallas team is in the position that they are. Because remember how this team in the beginning of the season, how they were just stuck at the bottom of the Western Conference and it looked like they were already in see you next season mode? Well, Ricardo Pepi basically changed that. He started to be the most promising player, or at least the most promising American player, and the hype train, of course, start to begin. And next thing you know, that goes the same thing with the resort for FC Dallas, getting themselves in this playoff race. But, like I said, if Ricardo Pepi can it's gonna all depend on whether or not if he can continue to be in such a great form as he has been and continue this hype train that he's in. Because if he's able to do so, then yeah, Dallas will definitely still have a chance to make the playoffs. But let's say if Pepi started to slow down a little bit in terms of his form, or worse, if he does get injured in some of these games, then yeah, that could be a serious blow to this Dallas team, and maybe that's when I think Dallas maybe will not have a shot in terms of making the playoffs. But now, looking at number 6, and that of course is the San Jose Earthquakes. So, despite the fact that, as I said in the review, that loss against the Rapids definitely hurts the Quakes' chance to make the playoffs because, with the way that pretty much almost every team around them were able to win during that match week, and they, of course, took the L, yeah, they basically lost some grounds to some of those teams. But, as I said before, the good news for the Quakes is that they do have a relatively easy schedule for the rest of the season, and, most of the games that they're going to be playing for the rest of the season is going to be against teams that is around them and fighting for those two spot in the Western Conference. Now, as good news as that is, the bad news is, will the Quakes able to win those games? And that's where that is a huge question mark, and especially the big question mark of this team is that they, even though they haven't lost a lot of games, I mean, that game against the Rapids was the first loss that they suffered in 11 games. They also have not won a lot of games. A lot of the reason why they haven't won a lot of games is they can't score. Like right now, this team don't really have enough goal scoring threat going forward, and it just feels like the goal well is continuing to dry up with this team. And not to mention the fact that, in the last game, besides the loss against the Rapids, which, again, that loss hurt because it happened in the 90th minute. What hurts more about that loss is Jeremy Abodisi and, what's his health status. Is he going to be able to be back after it seems like he has suffered for another concussion? And if he's not going to be back and he's going to be out long term, then that could be a huge blow to this Quakes team, their chances of making the playoffs, even if they're going to be playing against these teams that they're fighting to get to the last 2 spot in the Western Conference. So yeah, it is really tough to predict how this team is going to go, and it's just kind of wait and see to see how this team will do. And I think Almeida kind of mentioned earlier how every single game is literally a must-win game, and it kind of is. I mean, when you do play against team that you are fighting to make the playoffs and climb above the red line, you have to get all 3 points, because if you don't, you're going to fall behind them, and you're going to lose even more ground to those teams that you're chasing to trying to get those precious playoff spot in the Western Conference. But now at number 5, that of course is the Columbus Crew. Now, despite the fact that the Crew is the first team out in the Eastern Conference, and you probably think, why are they so low in this table of teams that could potentially make it to the playoffs despite being below the red line, is the fact that the Crew has not been in good form lately. Like, you look at the last 7 games, they have lost 6 out of their last 7 games, and the only win they got was against FC Cincinnati in the Hell is Real Derby, and I even said that win was very fortunate in a Columbus Crew standpoint. Like, if it wasn't for Kenneth Vermeer making those goalkeeping howler mistake, they probably could have lost that game against FC Cincinnati, and that's when the real panic will begin. But after that 3-2 loss against Orlando City, and not to mention that the biggest issue right now for the Crew this season isn't just because they have lost, they have been decimated by injury, but it's just that their defense have just getting ripped apart week after week, and that's something I didn't think it was going to happen with this team. Like last year, the reason why the Crew was able to win MLS Cup, not just well, the reason why they were able to win MLS Cup last year isn't just because of the fact that Lucas Arian was an absolute god and they were able to score goals in clinical moments, but it's also the fact that the defense was rock solid last season, and weren't able they were able to pretty much lock down in the back line, and that's just been the complete opposite this season. I mean, they have given up so many goals this season, and because of the fact that they give up so many goals this season, they always find themselves in a hole. And unless they don't fix this defensive issue, I don't see how they can really fix the form that they are in right now. I mean, again, even though this team is just below the red line right now because of this downward spiral the crew is going through, if it does continue, they can find themselves even deeper and deeper, and maybe even fell out of the playoff race in the Eastern Conference. But now, moving on to fourth place, and that team is Inter Miami. And, I know Inter Miami, right now, they are kind of like in the middle of the bottom part of the Eastern Conference, and they still do have, I think, like a 7-point gap that they have to make up to get above the red line. But here's the thing with Inter Miami, or actually no, it's not a 7-point gap. It's actually, I think, a 4-point gap that they have to make up for. And the reason why I still think that they have a higher chance to compared to the Columbus Crew is because they have been in incredible form. I mean, this team, ever since that 5-0 loss that they suffered against the Revs, it seems like that was almost kind of like a wake-up call. And whatever Phil Neville has done to this team ever since that 5-0 loss against the Revs have completely transitioned this team to become a laughingstock in the Eastern Conference, to a team that nobody wants to face. I mean, this has just been an incredible form that this Inter Miami team has done. And not to mention the fact that when you look at the fact that they also have a game in hand over a lot of teams, and even have 2 games in hand against some team. In fact, one of those teams, I think, is the Philadelphia Union, and I've heard that if they actually able to win those 2 game in hand, in the one that they have over the Union, and let's say the Union, of course, lose both of those games, or even maybe win only one of those games, Inter Miami is above the red line, and the Union could fell out of it. So there is definitely a possibility that this team can find themselves above the red line. Now, the only thing that I am a little concerned with Inter Miami is how long will this good form continue? Because obviously, with teams when they are in a great form, there's going to be times where things are going to be a little bit rough. And I know this might be a phrase that not a lot of people think it actually exists, but something that I always say about teams that is in a good form, especially heading to the last 2/3 of the season, is that they got to be careful. They have to continue that good form and not just kind of get phased out, because there's times where you could actually be in a good form, but then all of a sudden you're already in a good form a little bit too early into the regular season, and then in the back part of the regular season when you started to be in a bad form, then that could be a bit of an issue. And I know that probably doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but that's something that Inter Miami's got to have to know, that they have to keep getting points and have to keep winning games if they are able to get themselves even closer in terms of being a serious playoff contender. But again, this team, with the way that, I think a lot of the reason why they have been able to do so well is that they've been very locked down in terms of their defense, and also they've been able to score some crucial goal, which is something that we did not see Inter Miami did at all in the first season in MLS. So yeah, there is a high possibility that this team can actually make the playoffs, even though things did not get off to a great start to their season. Now, at number 3, I am going to go with the Vancouver Whitecaps. And in some way, I'm going to kind of use the same reason I said about Inter Miami, and the thing that they need to be a little bit careful with them being in such a good form and not just kind of slow down in time, or just kind of slow down and before the season begin, and they kind of go into a little bit of slump heading into the latter part of the season. And I'll say it with the Whitecaps again. I mean, even though the Whitecaps are in a good form right now, and right now I think they are the hottest team in out of all these 13 teams now that I put here on the board. They got to be careful that they don't just fall into that slump and eventually kind of fall apart in the latter part of the season. Now, the other thing I will also say about the Whitecaps is that, as impressive as this winning streak that they've been on right now, you remember those four teams that they beat are all below the, well, actually only one team is actually above the red line, and that of course is RSL, but that's the last team that is above the red line. But all the teams that they've been able to win are all against teams that is below the red line, like LAFC, both Austin twice, and then RSL. That's not really something that, it's impressive that you're able to get wins against all of these teams, but it's not something that is going to be something that could be impressive to say once they do face against good team. And what I'm trying to say is that we'll see what happens when the Whitecaps do face against some really good team, and they are going to do so. I mean, I look at their back end of the schedule, and they do have some very tough opponent that they have to face in the back end of the schedule. Now, if they're able to get points against those good teams, which, I think this season they have shown that they can definitely do well against these teams and can get some points against these tough opponents, then I think there is a really good shot that the Whitecaps could make it to the playoffs. And not to mention, the Whitecaps, out of all of these 13 teams, besides being red hot, this is the team that is closest to being above the red line. Like, they could be going above the red line as soon as next week if they're able to get a win against the Timbers, and RSL, of course, get a loss, and they can jump into that 7th spot, or even possibly into that 6th spot too, if they can beat the Portland Timbers. So yeah, there is a possibility that this team, out of all these teams, can actually be above the red line as soon as next week. But we'll see whether or not if that's going to be the case, and whether if they can continue this incredible run that they have, which is right now the longest unbeaten run in MLS that the Vancouver Whitecaps had at 11 games. Now, moving on to number 2. And at number 2, it's going to be LAFC. And I'm going to kind of sound like somebody that works at MLS.com, or somebody that is kind of like a media member, but I'm going to say that I just think that for LAFC, even though I know that they're right now not really in a spot where, well, they're still in a good spot in terms of making the playoffs, but they're definitely not in a better spot than what the Whitecaps are currently right now, which is just below the red line. I still think this LAFC team still have a bit good chances, and probably one of the best chances to make it to the playoffs. I mean, yes, losing Diego Rossi is going to hurt, but the thing is that I think they'll probably do fine without Rossi, and especially with the way that Rossi has really struggled in terms of his form and haven't been able to contribute the goal scoring point for this LAFC team. I think it's not going to hurt them as much as, let's say, maybe it was the Rossi of last season, when he was pretty much scoring almost every single game. And not to mention the fact that, with the resurgence of Brian Rodriguez, and the fact that they're potentially going to get Vela back in the latter part of the season, I think this team should be fine. And that the only thing that I might worry about this team is the back line, and we'll see whether or not if it can hold up. But I just still think that this is just way too talented of a team to miss the playoffs. Like, it just feels too good to be true. And, well, not just too good to be true, but it just feels like this, if LAFC doesn't miss the playoffs, this not only would be one of the most disastrous and underachieving seasons I've ever seen an MLS team go through, but it could be one of the most, if not the most talented team to fail to make the playoffs in all my time watching MLS. And yeah, I mean, I just feel like LAFC is still way too good to miss the playoffs, and there's just way too much talent on that team to not get this team over the playoff line. But now, looking at the team that most likely will make the playoffs, despite the fact that they're below the red line right now, is Atlanta United. And actually, I'll put the full name, not just ATL. But yeah, for Atlanta United, it's pretty obvious that, yes, they did suffer a bit of a setback in that loss against Nashville, but I have no doubt that this team will make the playoffs. Like, with the way that they have Gonzalo or Gonzalo Pineda in this this team, and I think he's going to do really well with this Atlanta team. And not to mention some of the guys on the attack, like Joseph Martinez, Ezekiel Barco, and even Marcelino Moreno started to wake up and really contribute on the attack. This team should be good enough to make the playoffs. And also, not to mention the fact that they also are in a bit of an unbeaten run. Well, actually, not an unbeaten run because they did lose against Nashville SC. But, you know, they all been in such a good form in the last couple of games that it's just a matter of time before this Atlanta team is going to find themselves above the red line. And again, this is another team where I'm going to also use the same argument as I used with LAFC. This team is just way too talented to miss the playoffs, and especially with the way that I think unlike LAFC, where there's still some question mark because LAFC hasn't really been in a good form, even though they of course they got that much needed 4-0 win against Sporting KC. That's different with this Atlanta team. This Atlanta team has been in such a good run and are kind of having almost like a Seattle Sounders as second half resurgence, as this top part of the clipper just broke here. Let me just put this back. Actually, you know what? It can hold on like this because I'm not really writing any it's on the board since we're now at number 1. But yeah, like I said, you know, I think Atlanta should be able to make it to the playoffs with the talent and especially the form that they're in these last couple of games. But yeah, there we have it. That is pretty much it in terms of looking at these 13 teams that is below the red line and who most likely have the best chance of making the playoffs. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this rankings, and if I put some team a little bit too low or maybe even a little bit too high in the rankings, let me know in the comments below. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.